Some astrologers say that it is the sun that is our ego, but it's actually the moon that is our ego within us. There are many ways to semantically break down that word ego, but what it essentially means is the part of us that sees the world differently from every other person. The sun is the objective reality that we are a soul and that each person is the very same in that respect. So a soul expressing itself is this singular objective action that every person does, although each person expresses something different. But the act of expressing it is this objective thing. But what's expressed is different. So the sun is the objective reality of our core individuality. The moon within us is the other half of our core individuality, and it is pure subjectivity because no two people think, behave, or experience the world in the same way, and not even remotely close. There's a really great quote, and I couldn't find it online, and it's from an author, and I can't remember, it was Oscar Wilde or F. Scott Fitzgerald or someone like that, and what they essentially said was, if only we could see the world from another person's perspective for just 1 minute, we would radically change our own view on the world. So this is the foundation of our lunar consciousness, that we see the world not as the world is, but as we are. And so the moon is this subjective reading of ourselves, but also of the world around us. But subjectivity is not enough to to live a fulfilling life. We also need objectivity to be able to agree on things with other people that is happening outside of both of us. And it's objective that two people, although they're seeing and perceiving the world differently, it's objective that they are essentially at the core of them a divine soul. So they're objectively the same at the deepest foundation of who they are. They have this divine essence to them. And that's the sun's understanding. That's the sun within you. But we build up this subjective view on the world because we're perceiving the world in a very particular way. Our brains, our bodies, our genetics, they're all fundamentally different. And so therefore we build up this subjective perception. So the lunar consciousness is how we're perceiving everything that's going on around us. And you have to keep in mind that it's not sensory perception per se, the five senses. The five senses in astrology are ruled by the five starry planets. Mars is sight, Mercury is smell, Jupiter is hearing, Venus is taste, and Saturn is touch. But what the moon is when it comes to perception, it's the ordering of all of these sensory perceptions into a combined whole. So that is why the moon is the source of our intuition. The moon is our intuition, which is this holistic feeling we get about a person or about a situation. Because with the moon, we're not making this checklist of observations and saying, I'm hearing this, I'm smelling this, and then therefore this. The moon just knows things that are beyond that kind of checklist, objective analysis of reality. And that's what our intuition is. It's above just the sensory perceptions. It's this combined feeling that we get, this combined sensation we have. And it's one of the amazing things about human beings is that we have this ability to receive and then understand information that goes beyond the kind of calculative, objective mind would have it, or analytical mind. So the sun and moon together, they're the core of our individuality. And these two planets usually are spoken, or I like to speak about them together and group them together. We see that they're the two largest planetary bodies in the sky. And likewise in us, these are the two most important planets to our core individuality. So the sun is the inner knowing that there is this unity to all of consciousness, and that inherently within you, you are this divine, infinite soul. But the moon's inner knowing is that there's a unity to your consciousness, your individual consciousness, and that individual awareness, or you could say this egoistic awareness. There's a unity to everything that you as an individual feel. So this is why when we talk about the moon, we say the moon is our mind. And again, that's a very loaded term like the word ego, so you have to be very precise with it. The mind is the result of all of your senses taking in information from the minute you're born, and that combination of experiences creates this self-conception or the self-image of who we believe that we are, which is our ego. And so next, the moon is most commonly associated with our emotions or our emotional world. But emotions are very complex, and they're not just ruled over by one single planet, the moon. For example, we have water signs in the zodiac, and water is the symbol for the emotional abilities that we have, or the different realms of emotional experiences that we live in. And then we also have Venus, which is a water planet. It's ruled by the element water. And Venus also rules the heart chakra, which is the feeling center of our body. Then we have Jupiter, which rules the endocrine system, which rules our hormones, which create emotional balances and imbalances. So you can see emotions are so wide-ranging, and our emotional awareness is extremely multifaceted. So with the moon, when it comes to emotions, the moon is the intuitive, holistic sense that we get from our perception of the world that sends a message to our body in the form of this sensation or this feeling. And we say, my intuition is saying something. And then that holistic intuitive sensation sends or gives us a message about how we're perceiving something that's happening around us, or perceiving another person, etc. The way the moon uses emotions, or the way the moon is related to emotions, is that we have that holistic perception, and then it creates an emotion from that. It could be an emotion of fear, it could be an emotion of danger, it could be an emotion of love and acceptance about something. And it's important to understand that not all of our emotions begin from that intuitive place. The moon that's how the moon deals with emotions. But the reason why we feel something comes from so many other different sources and so many other human activities that evoke a sensation within us. And just take any other planet. All planets have a certain emotional characteristic to them. And you can think about a masculine fire planet like Mars. Mars creates a certain emotion, and the hallmark emotion from Mars is anger and frustration that's meant to propel us to solve some kind of problem. So that's not an intuitive kind of emotion, but it's an emotion nonetheless. And it's very important, I'm just going to mention it here really quickly, that emotions are logical and they're rational, but they can become irrational or illogical. Many people like to create the dynamic or the polarity that we have reason and we have emotions, and that one is rational and emotions are irrational, but they're not irrational. We feel things for a very specific reason. That reason might be beyond us, like how our intuition works. If we're not as touched into our intuition, it can be a very mysterious thing, but when we're really in tune with our intuition, we know why we feel something, and there's a rationale to it. And as I said, if you feel, say, anger or frustration like with Mars, there's a reason, there's a rational reason why. Because say something went wrong and you had been working all day on fixing it, but it's still wrong, you get frustrated, and that frustration motivates you to continue to fix it. There's a reason why you feel emotions. Or grief. You feel grief if a loved one dies, and that grief is meant to send a message to you of sending an idea of having gratitude and understanding and reflecting on that person. And there's a moment of solace, and there are moments where you have to really think about how your life is going to change from there on forward. It's a pensive time. It's not irrational to feel grief, but as I said, at any point you can take emotions way too far, and say if you feel grief for 10 years because a loved one died, the emotion becomes irrational because it's no longer serving you to grow. It's not rational to feel grief for an extensive period of time after a loved person dies, although you can always have that place in your heart to remember them. But the grief stage is that, it's a stage. And it's also irrational to be angry all the time. It's not actually serving you. It becomes irrational. So I just want to mention that because emotions are often grouped into this irrational kind of category. And the moon is not irrational in any way like that. It's emotional, and it serves a very important purpose, our intuition. And it's very rational in that sense, that there's a reason why we are getting messages from our perception of the world. It's to serve us and it's to help us. So the lunar consciousness is the intuitive emotional core. And what's essential to understanding this idea is that no two people's emotional cores are the same. The emotional cores we have are very real to us, but they're very different from every other person. And that, again, is our subjectivity. That's the moon within us. But it's very important to understand that we're all extremely different and our intuitions are all very different. Even if you come to the same conclusion about a certain situation as another person, oh yeah, we both felt like this was not the right place to be at the right time. We both felt that something was wrong, so we both got out of there. Yeah, we were connected. We realized that our intuitions gave us the same message. But the way that you get to that intuitive response is very different from the other person. You pick up on different details. You feel emotions and you feel intuitions in different intensities and frequencies. So it's important to understand that nobody is the same when it comes to your intuitive emotional core. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is to show an extremely fundamental part of the moon, which is our ability for empathy. And empathy, what empathy is the connection that we make, understanding that we're never going to fully understand that person's emotional side. We're never going to actually feel what they feel. But empathy, what it does is it connects us. We can relate to it, even if we're never going to actually really know what they're feeling or what they're thinking. Empathy is the connector between two people in that. And when the moon is, and what the moon does is it's that bridge that helps us to understand other people and take it to the next level and be able to feel a connection between two people, despite the fact that we're never going to be completely on the same exact emotional page. There's always going to be something different because we're different people. And there's a really interesting, I have an interesting story about that. When I was living in Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn on Vernon Avenue, it was late, it wasn't too late, but it was a dark winter night. It was cold outside, and I went to the bodega. And I was in a very tumultuous relationship at the time, and I was at this moment very emotionally distraught. And I went to the bodega, and outside the bodega there was this guy, and he seemed strung out, and he was looking like he was asking for money. So, you know, that happens. So I'm walking up, but then he seems really like upbeat, and he seems really happy, and he's really well dressed, and he's wearing this black pea coat, and I think he had a scarf on, and he was just cool. And he started talking to me, and we got to talking a little bit. He was asking how I was doing. Again, he was empathizing. He could tell that I was in kind of this distraught emotional place. And I asked him what his name was. He said his name was Jean, and it's not a common name in Bed-Stuy. Jean, like Jean. I said, that's my name. That's crazy. That's your name. You wouldn't expect. It's a very French name. So he says, yeah, and it was just really funny. And so then we were talking, and I was telling him about my situation, and he said, it's important that you know that emotions are real, but emotions aren't facts. And I had to repeat it. I repeated it out loud to him because I never heard someone portray it like that. And I didn't understand it for years later, but it always stuck with me. And what he was saying is that two people, you can be trying to agree with somebody on something, like this is what happened, that's what happened. And then, or you can say, I'm feeling this, you're feeling that. At the end of the day, what you're feeling is so real, but it's not a fact. So two people are always going to have this separation no matter how close you are with the other person. They're so real to you as an individual, but they're not factual, as I was talking about the objective reality that the sun gives us. And masculine planets and masculine signs as well. But that subjectivity, it's so important to really take that in and to really contemplate it. And as I was saying, it's the emotion, it's the empathetic quality of the moon that, despite the inability to fully live in the reality of another person, you can connect yourself with that other person. And the moon is what does that within us. So this is one of the keys of the moon, is that we can never really be in the same perceptive world of another person. But we have this ability for empathy and compassionate understanding for another person. And especially when that other person is feeling low, like how Jean came and he was talking to me, and he could sense something was wrong, and so he wanted to know more. And he was, you know how some people on the street, they juggle or they do tricks, or they, you know, his thing that he did to help people, which he, you know, I gave him some money afterward because he was asking for money. He was kind of giving wisdom on the street, helping people along, counseling people. That was his ability, that was his contribution, and I was so grateful for it. So the moon, his moon, must have been very strong, or was very strong, because it's this moon that is comforting other people, and it's nurturing another person. And it's an extremely natural reaction to want to give a person a hug or rub their shoulder or offer kind words when you're sensing that they're feeling down. And with empathy, you're not calculating empathy, you're just naturally doing it, just like how our intuition, the feeling and the sensation comes about. It's not a thinking process. So in a little bit, I'm going to be talking about how we use the moon to get our needs met, and it's an important ability of the moon. But the nurturing side of the moon that I'm talking about, it's about helping other people get their needs met. And it comes from the affective side and wanting to offer yourself to the other person, because it's this holistic emotional response we're having from observing and perceiving and absorbing and then comprehending everything that's going around, and specifically absorbing and comprehending the emotions in other people and working to understand their emotional cores. So the lunar consciousness is all about tending to other people's needs through comforting them and with loving attention, because empathy is what's uniting the two emotional cores of two people or more people into a common experience. So if you remember from the video about the sun, I talked about what the sun is literally doing in the sky, and you can get a really good idea of what the planets are doing within us and how they operate in our consciousness as forces of human nature when you just are reading them and what are they literally doing. And you can get some really interesting ideas. So what's the moon doing in the sky? The first thing you notice about the moon is that every day it's a little bit different. It's always changing. And in fact, at no point is the moon stagnant in terms of its size. Every second it's either growing, waxing, or diminishing, getting smaller, waning. And this reveals a very profound truth about the moon, and it's that we're never the same people from moment to moment. Our perception of what's going on around us is always changing and morphing, and then therefore changing who we are. So our self-perception, the moon, is this force that's always changing. And remember with the sun video, the sun within us is never changing. It's always the same. Our soul never changes. It's only trying to get a clearer expression of itself. But the soul is this core within us that is always the same from birth till death, and in fact throughout all of our existence. But it expresses itself a little bit differently, but it's always the same at the foundation. The moon is the opposite. It's the part of us that's always morphing and changing because of our perception of what's going around us. The moment itself is always morphing and changing, which then we're picking up on, we're perceiving, and then in turn it changes us. So we're never really the same person day in and day out, moment in and moment out. And even if we feel like we didn't do anything at all in a certain day, we just laid in our bed and slept the whole day, well, that doing nothing becomes a part of you. It becomes a part of your life, part of your story. And our self-image will be changed by it. And will be, our body will change from it. Our memories will change. It might be very subtle because we didn't do anything, but it's this constant morphing and changing that is the moon, and our self-image that's changing. And our self-image is our past, it's our present, and it's how we see the future playing out. So we base our self-image on the things that happen in time. You can think about it. We did something in our past, and that creates an idea of who we are. Our present, something's happening in the present, and that's we're having to be engaged in the present, and then we're seeing the future. Something can happen in the future, and what do we want that future to be? What will that future to be? It's the moon that imagines those things that are going to come to pass. So whether we realize it or not, we redefine our past based on our present circumstances, and then that perception changes what we're going to see in the future. I don't think about my past the same as I used to think about my past, because it's always getting redefined. So each moment has the power to modify our self-image in infinitely dynamic ways. So the moon within us is this ability to change our self-identity, just like how the moon is changing from second to second. And the stronger and the healthier our moon is, the more we're able to actually make those changes, to change ourselves and to change our self-image in a positive direction. So the Vedic sage Jaimini gives two very interesting and very important ideas in his text about the moon that are related to this idea of changes. So the first idea that he says is that when the moon is in a certain position in the chart, it will make a person a musician. Very interesting. Why music? Well, music is a series of changes. You go from one note to the next, and each note is defined by the note that preceded it, and also defines the note that comes after it. So a melody or a rhythm, when we're listening to it, it emits this feeling because of what note it actually is, and then also the spacing between the notes and how the notes are interacting and relating to one another. And you can think about that like our past, present, and future, because we're living our lives in this kind of flow of notes and flow of rhythms. Life isn't just this static. You just press the one key on a piano, and then it's the same note for 10 minutes, and we call that a song. No, that's not how music is. At least beautiful music, or at least, music, you could call that music, but that's not how life is. Life is not this one static note that goes from when we're born to when we die. And that's what makes life interesting and dramatic and what it is. It's these ups and downs, these flows, these melodies. And it's what makes it's what life really is. It's music in a certain sense, because we have to go through these ebbs and flows. And it's what ends up defining us. We're defined by our heights, we're defined by our low points, and we're even defined by the moments where we're quote unquote not doing anything. So the moon in our consciousness is just like a song, or it's just like music. It's the past notes, it's the present note, and it's what the notes that are to come, or the movement of musics that are to come, that all combine into what we call reality, and what are combined into what we call our self-identity, which is always in flux and it's always shifting. So that's the moon within you, and the moon what the moon does within us replicates music, and that's how life works as well. So when the moon within you is in a certain position in the chart, it can make you good at music, because you can then apply that lunar consciousness into the art form of music. And then the second idea that Jaimini gives about the moon is that the moon will make a person, when it's in a certain position in the chart, a writer, as well as Jupiter and Mercury, if those are the three planets that make a person a writer. So why would the moon be one of those planets that makes a person a writer? Well, because the moon is the source of our imagination, and this is what I've been saying about the future, the moon's relationship with the future. Because the moon is the projection of ideas of ourselves, or just ideas about the world in general, into a certain image or a possibility for something that may exist or may not exist. And Jupiter makes a person a writer because Jupiter creates this kind of ability for abstraction, and also brings deeper wisdom into a story, either nonfiction or fiction. Jupiter helps to expand a person's ability to communicate ideas about the world. And also, as I said, brings a more, it's the knowledge that you're transmitting when you're writing something or you're communicating through words. And then Mercury as well, it's the ability to communicate and the ability for the actual using your hand to write or for typing. So Mercury is kind of more on that language, the element of using language. But the moon is the imaginative part that makes a person a good writer or be interested in writing. So a very simple example to think about, if you just close your eyes and imagine an apple, or you can just even keep your eyes open, imagine what an apple looks like. And what you're doing is you've absorbed all the information throughout your life to think about what does an apple look like. And that information comes from your past. And now you're projecting the image of the apple into a space in your mind. So you're going to see that apple very differently from every other person. The way that you're angled on and looking at it, the slight coloring, the way it shines. It's going to be, that imagination you have is going to be completely different from another person. But what you've done is you've literally created something, you've imagined something into existence. And even though it's only a thought form, it still exists. So it doesn't have to be something visual. It can be a story, it can be anything. But this is the moon operating in you. It's the ability to imagine something into reality. So any writer, either fiction or a nonfiction writer, has to have this ability to imagine or conjure up an idea based on what they already know, based on the information they've brought in and what their mind has perceived throughout their life. So the lunar consciousness within us is this ability to ruminate and mold thoughts and ideas and then to create something else. Or the word create isn't really the word, to imagine something else, to project in your mind's eye something else. So the actual putting of the imagination into language is the Mercury part, and the ability to transmit deeper concepts or philosophies or knowledge is the Jupiterian part. But the moon, we have to remember, is our self-perception and it's our self-image. And that's the mixture of the past, who we are now, and who we're imagining ourselves to be. So that's the key part of the moon when it comes to writing, the imagination aspect. So each of the 5 starry planets, the planets that are not the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, or the sun and the moon, so Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn, they all rule 2 signs in the zodiac. They all rule 1 masculine sign and they all rule 1 feminine sign, meaning that each of those planets has a masculine and feminine side, or masculine and feminine attributes or abilities. The sun and the moon, on the other hand, they each only rule 1 sign. The sun rules 1 masculine sign, Leo, and the moon rules 1 feminine sign, Cancer. Therefore, the sun is pure masculinity, and we call it the divine masculine, and the moon is pure femininity, or the divine feminine. So the divine feminine in our consciousness is pure receptivity. We are constantly receiving information all the time from our environment. And it's the moon that gives us this ability to absorb. And as we're taking in information, we're changing little by little, and sometimes just one little thing, one small observation, or one thing that we bring into us can change us a great deal. But it's through the moon within us that we're receiving information and receiving things or people into our life. And then we use our sun to act upon what we're receiving. The sun is pure action, and it's the polar opposite of the moon, which is pure reception. And the interplay of acting and receiving is how the battery of our masculinity and our femininity operates in each person. I was beginning to talk about this a little earlier, but one of the most important aspects of the divine feminine is getting our needs met. I was saying how we, through the empathetic quality and trait of the moon, we help other people get their needs met. But a key part of the moon is getting our own needs met, to receive what we feel that we need, what we think we need, or what we actually need to live our life. So the healthier the moon is, the better the person is at getting what they believe that they need in any moment. And you can probably see from the phrasing, the question is, what do we need and what do we want and what do we desire? Because those are two different things. And a big part of the journey of life is being able to distinguish between these two things, what we want or what we desire and what we actually need. So the moon is teaching us this throughout our life, and it's working to elevate our self-awareness, these two things. So through the cravings and desires for love, for attention, for affection, for food, for water, for really anything, we're learning more about ourselves when we're desiring to bring something into us. And gradually we learn more about ourselves as we're living our life. And the moon is this self-educating planet. It helps us to come into closer awareness of who we are as individuals. Similar how the sun is teaching us more about ourselves as this divine soul and the deep divinity within us. So the deep wisdom of the lunar consciousness is really one of the things it's teaching us is this division between knowing what we just want or desire and what we truly need to grow as individuals. Because very often there's a chasm between these two things, and these things can be very different, our desires and our real needs. But a very mature and healthy moon is able to marry these two things together. And what ends up happening is that we find out what we really need to become to grow in self-awareness and to grow in our life. We find out what we really need. And even if it's not something that we used to want, but what we end up doing is we start to want and we start to desire what we need, even if it's something that is maybe undesirable to us at a certain point in our life. And that comes down to being honest about what we need. And that can be very difficult. But it's when we're desiring what we need and we're able to really perceive that, yeah, this is something that I never thought I would ever want, but I realized I needed that in order to do really anything, but most importantly to grow. And then when we're able to find that wisdom, all of a sudden we find ourselves walking the path in life that our soul was incarnated to experience. So once our lunar consciousness reaches this healthy state of desiring what we need, the sun then comes into play and puts that desire into action and then helps our soul build that life that our soul is yearning for us to build and to live. So a little bit more of a practical example. That's kind of a big kind of deep analysis of desires and wants and needs. But on a more practical level, let's think about it like we're seeing the world around us and we're receiving information and we come to certain conclusions and we say, I need X, Y, and Z to be happy and content in this moment or to be happy and content in the future. So the moon force within us, what it does is it puts us into a position to get those needs met through adaptation and through adapting to the world around us. And this is a really core attribute of the moon, adaptation. If we want anything in life, we have to change something within us or change something around us to place us into a better position to make it happen. For example, if you want to marry a very rich billionaire so you don't have to think about money and you can get all of the material needs met that you want, what you have to do is you have to go where all the rich billionaires live. In other words, you have to put yourself in an environment where you're drastically increasing your chances for that to happen. And if it can go for anything, if you want to be a Formula One driver, you've got to adapt your environment around you. You've got to adapt to putting yourself into a position in life that best reflects that opportunity from actually happen. It increases your chances of doing that or becoming that Formula One driver. But really quickly, remember that it's not the moon that is the action itself of moving to the town where all the rich billionaires are. The actual action of doing it is a mixture of Mars, the strategy to do it, Mercury, the communication, Venus, the relationship building, the give and take of what's happening. There's so many other forces in our consciousness that are operating. What the moon is the internal understanding of, since I want this or since I need this, I have to put myself into this position in order to receive it. Life on earth is very unaccommodating, and it's a very difficult place, and everyone's really struggling to get their needs met in one form or another, and it seems like one problem happens after the next. But even the very lucky people who are born very beautiful and their lives seem to fall perfectly in place, they also have needs and desires that are requiring them to adapt and change. They have to use their lunar consciousness to kind of to perceive what's going on and put themselves in a better position to get what they want. A person with absolutely no desires whatsoever, in theory, they don't ever have to adapt to anything. Again, no desires, I have no needs, and therefore I don't have to adapt. I can just sit here under this tree for the rest of my life and not do anything, in theory. But even that person, once they get thirsty, once they get hungry, they have to stand up and they have to go get a drink of water, or they have to go eat some food, which is requiring you to adapt yourself to the new desire that you're thirsty. You have to adapt. I can't just sit here. I have to go and find water. So adaptation is this fundamental aspect of living life on earth, because all of our needs don't just come and fall into our lap. Even if it seems like some people, that's how their lives work, everyone has to adapt in some way, shape, or form. And it's the moon within us that is doing that. It's the ability we have to adapt. Just to survive at all, we have to adapt constantly to this difficult world. And the opposite attitude of that is of finding a way to adapt to our surroundings is just waiting for the world to adapt to you, to your needs, and for your needs to just be served up on a silver platter. Oh, yep, perfect. Everything just fell right into place and I didn't have to do anything. Well, that's a person whose moon is in a unhealthy state of mind, having the expectation that you don't have to adapt to the difficult world around us. But the people with a healthy moon, these are people who know how to put themselves into the best possible position to get what they want. And that just means adapting to other people and adapting to the present circumstance you're in. And of course, since we all perceive the world differently, because we all have different self-images because of the moon, we all have different needs and desires that we want to have get met. The strength of the moon within you shows how well you understand what you want and what you need. And the next step of that is adapting yourself and putting yourself in the best position to achieve it. So the moon is perceiving the environment around us, it's feeling, and it's coming to understand what it is we need. It's empathetic, and it helps other people get what they need, and it's able to adapt to the ever-changing dynamics of life. All of these are qualities of sociability, of our ability to be social. And so the moon really is our social intelligence. When we're saying, oh, read the room, what you're saying is that you need to use your lunar abilities so that you can better understand the context of the situation you're in, your environment, so that you can enmesh yourself healthily in that environment. In the same sutra that Jaimini says that the moon gives the ability for being a musician, he also says that the moon gives the ability for social science or sociology. And when you think about it, getting your needs met largely depends on your relationships with other people. How well you get along socially with other people is such a key element of being happy and content with your life. Now, you can have a great moon in your chart, a very healthy moon, and be a totally introverted person. You're not social, so to say. But I guarantee that those introverts, when they go to a store, they're not being rude to the cashier. They're not snapping their fingers at the waiter in the restaurant and being cruel to a person who's just doing their job, who's a stranger to you. Or being, when they're at a party, they're not being a nuisance, or being, say, a person who's in a social setting that they're causing other people to feel bad about themselves and just being disruptive in that sense. Although they'd probably rather not be there, they're introverted people. But the moon, what it is, it's this social intelligence, and what that is essentially knowing how to treat other people well. Knowing that they have an emotional center that wants just as much as you do to feel good about themselves and to feel like they're being treated well, that other people can empathize, that I don't want to be hurt just as much as you don't want to be hurt. If you're introverted and you are going around and you treat other people badly, that doesn't mean you have a healthy moon. It means you're lacking the ability for empathy and the social intelligence to realize that everyone has a unique emotional core that should be respected. And very generally, you'll see people who are born under the full moon or born during a full moon will have this heightened social quality to them. They're more expansive in social situations and they have this bright presence like the bright moon, like how the moon is so bright in the sky when it's full. And I want to briefly touch on what it means or what the characteristics of people who are born under new moons, waxing moons, full moons, and then waning moons. And this is very general guidelines. The general rule of thumb is that the brighter the moon is in the sky when you're born, the moment you're born, the more that growing things in the material world becomes more important as the person grows older. The waxing period from just a single degree separated from the sun until the exact degree of the full moon, these people will prioritize building things in their material life. And the more full the moon is when they're born, the more important growing things in the material world become more important as they get older. From a single degree after the full moon, when the moon begins getting smaller little by little, all the way into the exact new moon, these people who are born under the waning moon periods will prioritize material experiences much less as they get older. They become more internally focused and are less likely to feel the need to be as social. And of course, this is a very general rule because personalities are very complex, but in general, you'll see that bright full moon people keep that extroverted sense about them even as they get a little bit older. While waning moon and new moon people are very much more within them, much more content in their inner world, and they enjoy their inner life a lot more as they get older and mature. So lastly, to combine the features that I've been discussing, we can put all of these different attributes of the moon in the context of the moon's ability for growth and for decay, kind of like how I was talking about the moon waxing and waning. The moon grows, it waxes, and then it wanes, it diminishes or it decays. So in short, the lunar consciousness within us is this ability to make things in our life grow. And then when they've reached their climax or their pinnacle, to allow those things to healthily wind down and decay and eventually die. And this is the intelligence of understanding the cycles of life. There's a time and place for everything. And as we've said, every moment is different. And there are moments of creating, there are moments for allowing then the natural destruction or the gradual and natural disintegration of things. Because nothing is ever stagnant, nothing is ever stationary in life, as we're talking about music. Things never stay the same, they're always growing and waxing and waning. And that's what the cycles of life are. And it's cycles within cycles. And the moon has this specific 28-day cycle, and we're constantly living in that lunar cycle. And it's such a vast subject, but as a very simple example to help you understand this, and I often use some kind of variation on in this example. So think about how a party begins, when it's just the hosts that are there and a couple friends. Eventually more people show up, and then there's this climax when there's the most people at the party and the energy is at its highest. There's the most conversation and there's the most action. You can just feel this is the peak of the party. And then eventually people start to leave, and then eventually everyone goes home, so that there's a time to arrive and then there's a time to leave, the cycle of the party. Being the last person at the party every time, the people who wouldn't leave, if you get that reputation, or not wanting to leave or not wanting the fun to ever end, no one really likes that person because they don't realize that there's a time and place. They don't want the cycle to end. They don't understand the cycle and respect the cycle of the party. It's the moon within us. It's the lunar consciousness, the ability to understand how things ebb and flow and grow and diminish, that says, okay, it's time to go. It's about that time. So you can extend this example into any sector of life, of reading the room, reading the environment around you, and finding yourself in life. Where am I at in this particular moment? Where does this have to do in the cycle of today, in the cycle of this period of my life? And you come to healthy understandings of where you are in the cycle. An unhealthy moon person will want to hold on to their youth, for example, and their physical beauty. When they're 70, 80 years old, they are still in the mental phase that their physical beauty is the key to their happiness. And these are not the people that are allowing themselves to age gracefully. And you'll see people who are still focused on things that they were focused on when they're really young. Those past experiences are consuming their present, and they are imagining their future in a way that is still based on a past part of this. It's still based on a time in the cycle that they were in their life that's unhealthy. They're not moving on. And this is a trait of the moon of nostalgia. People that can't move ahead with their life and live in the present moment in a graceful and accepting manner. And these people in general with the unhealthy moon, they're not in the flow of life and understanding that there's growth and decay, and these are just parts of life. But a healthy moon, on the other hand, will relish the beauty of their youth, but they're not, when they're in the waning aspect of their physical beauty, and just one example of physical beauty, that there are other roles that they play in life. It's not all about being beautiful when you're older. And that there are other needs there are other things that we need to fulfill in our consciousness and to grow and to learn about. And that there are so many different stages of life, and they all deserve our attention and our concentration, or they all deserve our full attention in the present moment, to be able to respect the past, to live in the present, and to envision a positive future, and to imagine your life going in a healthy direction based on what's happening right in the moment.